you've seen this before. Not once, but again and again. The faces change, but the pain remains the same. A woman who laughs brightly at dinner, only to cry herself to sleep later, because her heart has wandered back into the same broken pattern. You call it bad luck, or maybe fate, but deep down, you sense something else. A cycle repeating itself. This is not the universe punishing you. This is not destiny pulling your strings. This is karma in its truest, most human form. The unhealed wound replaying itself, demanding attention until you finally face it, and the cycle will keep spinning until you break it. Karma as the inner loop. You've lost your temper before, at work when someone dismissed your effort, at home when a loved one pushed your limits, even with yourself when you failed to meet your own impossible standards. In the moment, that anger felt like strength, like finally taking control. But soon after, it left behind shame, regret, and the hollow weight of knowing you only deepened the wound. That's the paradox of anger. It feels powerful, while it secretly robs you of power. And what makes it even more dangerous is how it repeats. You think each flare-up is new, sparked by some fresh injustice. But often, you're not fighting today's battle, you're fighting yesterday's ghosts. Social media stirs it. Old trauma disguises itself as a present offense. Work stress reopens a scar that never healed. This is what we call karma. Not some cosmic punishment, but the mental loops you never resolved. The Stoics saw this clearly. 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius wrote about the mind recycling its same impressions, dragging us into the same suffering. Seneca warned that unchecked anger becomes a habit that rules us. Epictetus insisted, the event itself is not the problem. It is your interpretation, your rehearsal of the same inner story. The Stoics didn't try to erase anger. They learned to master it, to stop living the same pain on repeat. And that is what you will learn here. Over the next 8 steps, you will discover how to name the fire before it consumes you, how to starve the stories that enslave you, how to train with discomfort until you grow stronger than the cycle, how to guard the word yes, so resentment cannot breed, how to silence drama before it drags you in, how to redirect anger into purpose, how to breathe yourself back to calm, and, perhaps hardest of all, how to use your enemy as a teacher. Because the final truth is this: every wasted moment in anger is a life you will never get back. The Stoics remind you, time is your only true possession. To waste it in rage is to burn it with your own hands. So the question becomes, will you keep reliving the same pain, or will you break the cycle? Rule 1. Name the fire before it consumes you. Epictetus once warned, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. He meant the first spark of emotion, the raw impression, is not yet the truth. It is a flare, not a fact. You feel a quick heat behind your ribs, an abrupt tightening in the throat, and the mind instantly assembles a verdict. They meant to wound you. They are disrespectful. You must answer. That leap from sensation to story is the old mistake Stoics cautioned against. It hands your choices over to a phantom and turns reflex into rule. Modern neuroscience gives this ancient insight a modern vocabulary. When you pause and name what you feel, whispering to yourself, this is anger or this is hurt, your nervous system changes. Labeling creates a sliver of distance between you and the surge. The amygdala, the engine of threat, eases its grip, and the prefrontal cortex can re-engage. In plain terms, naming slows you down enough to choose rather than be chosen. Think of Ruth Bader Ginsburg sitting on the bench with a face that looked calm because she had trained her response to be deliberate. She was renowned for pauses that functioned as armor. Before she spoke, she allowed that quiet. She did not rush to defend or to strike. She identified impressions, considered them, and then answered. Her pauses were not indecision. They were a practice of sovereignty. Picture a late night at home. You are tucking your child into bed when your phone vibrates. The message is blunt, sharp, clearly meant to provoke. Your immediate impulse is to fire back with words that will burn and assert your dignity. Instead, you close your eyes, breathe once, and whisper inside. That's anger. The word itself does half the work. The urge still sits in you, but it no longer commands you. You have created a gap, a small, decisive fissure between stimulus and action. This practice also exposes where eruptions truly originate. Often the rage scorching your present is not solely about now. It is an echo of an old humiliation, a mismatch from childhood, a repeated script that has not been revised. Naming the emotion pulls that echo into the light. It ceases to be proof you are broken and becomes a pattern you can study. Here is the simple experiment. For the next 24 hours, when any flare rises, anger, shame, fear, name it out loud or silently, then breathe 3 slow counts before you respond. After each instance, jot a single line in your phone. Time, the word, a brief note about what happened. That record will reveal the contours of repetition you cannot otherwise see. The first days will feel awkward. You will still be pulled. But with repetition, the practice widens the pause and shrinks the hijack. Over time, these small interruptions compound. They give you micro wins, evidence that you are not merely a reactor, but an agent who can observe and redirect. As you collect those jottings, patterns emerge. Times of day, certain people, specific phrases that consistently spark you. That knowledge lets you design preemptive moves, an extra minute before a meeting, a planned phrase when a relative pushes your old buttons, a walk instead of an answer, making it possible to treat the past without reenacting it. Start small. Treat each pause as practice. This is your first Stoic move. Name the fire, because what you can name, you can tame. Once named, the story tries to begin. Don't feed it. Rule 2. Starve the story. Facts over fictions. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, if you are troubled by external things, it is not these things that disturb you, but your judgment of them, and it is in your power to wipe out that judgment now. The emperor knew the mind is a skilled playwright, endlessly staging dramas out of half-seen moments. A glance, a silence, a word clipped short. Instantly, your imagination casts roles of villain and victim, betrayal and revenge. Yet the Stoics warned, stick to the facts, because the facts are almost never as painful as the fictions you attach to them. Modern psychology calls this rumination, the repetitive chewing of thoughts that are mostly invention. A partner sends a short message, can't talk, busy. You stare at it, and your mind begins its spiral. They're cold, they're angry. Maybe they don't love me anymore. None of this is written. None is proven. What you feel is the echo of unfinished history, The childhood moment when affection felt uncertain. The teenage heartbreak that still smolders. The present becomes a stage where your old wounds audition for a comeback. Rumination doesn't just extend the pain, it multiplies it, turning an ambiguous text into a whole universe of rejection. Naomi Osaka understood this trap when she chose to withdraw from press conferences that had turned into cycles of provocation. She saw that if she kept showing up to feed the media narrative, endlessly defending, reacting, explaining, her peace would evaporate. By stepping back, she refused to feed the story. She chose the bare fact, her need to protect her mental health, over the swirl of interpretations others imposed. In that choice, she demonstrated a Stoic principle. Facts hold their ground, while stories inflate until they consume you. You've probably been caught in this same spiral. A message arrives, brief and unfinished, or a friend fails to return your call. You fill in the silence with entire novels of meaning. They don't value me. They're pulling away. I must have done something wrong. But if you reduce it to the skeleton of truth, what remains? A message was short. A call was missed. A silence existed. That's it. The storm is not in the event, but in the narrative your mind wraps around it. Here's your practice. The next time you feel that spiral beginning, pause and take 2 minutes to write down only the facts. Strip away adjectives, motives, and predictions. Who said what? When? What actually happened? Nothing more. Then challenge yourself to invent 3 neutral explanations. Maybe they were preoccupied. Maybe they were simply tired. Maybe no meaning existed at all. Leave the paper. Step away. An hour later, read what you wrote. You will often see how thin the facts were, and how much your imagination tried to smuggle in under the cover of certainty. This is your second Stoic move. Facts, not fictions. Because once you starve the story, the fire has no fuel left to burn. You've stripped the drama back to its bones, but starving the story is only the beginning. The next challenge is harder. Training the muscle that refuses to take the bait, even when discomfort presses against you. And that is where your deeper practice begins. Rule 3. Train with discomfort. Pain as practice. Seneca advised his students, set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself, "Is this the condition I feared?" He believed that deliberately practicing discomfort stripped fear of its bite. When you choose hardship on your own terms, hardship loses its sting when it arrives uninvited. Modern psychology has a word for this: hormesis. Small, controlled doses of stress. Exercise, fasting, cold exposure don't weaken you. They toughen your system. They teach your nervous system that stress is survivable, even strengthening. Instead of being hijacked by discomfort, you become familiar with it. It stops owning you. Wim Hof, the Iceman, embodies this truth. Through cold immersion and breath control, he has trained his body and mind to stay steady in conditions most people call unbearable. His method isn't masochism, it's mastery. By stepping deliberately into discomfort, he shows that you can meet pain with calm, not panic. He reveals that what frightens you can also free you. Picture a small, ordinary moment. You're drafting an angry email, fingers jabbing at the keys, your chest tight, your pulse rising. Before you hit send, you step away and turn on the cold tap, 90 seconds under icy water. At first, your skin screams. but slowly your breath steadies. By the time you step out, the urge to press send has melted. The email no longer feels urgent. The fire that consumed you has cooled into perspective. The cold taught you what anger tried to hide, that pain can be endured without reaction. Here lies the deeper wisdom. Anger convinces you discomfort must be avoided, that relief is the only safe option. But the Stoics trained differently. They saw discomfort as rehearsal for freedom. Each chosen hardship is practice for the day hardship chooses you. By facing cold, hunger, or silence, you learn that these sensations, like anger, can be carried without collapse. They lose their terror when you meet them on purpose. This practice matters. Every controlled discomfort chips away at the illusion that you are fragile. The skipped meal that doesn't break you. The cold splash that steadies you. The silence you sit in without filling it. Each becomes proof that you can hold more than you thought. What once felt unbearable now feels like training ground. And with that realization comes freedom. The confidence that you are not defined by what hurts. Here's your practice. Today, choose one deliberate discomfort. A cold shower at dawn, a walk without your phone, a skipped indulgence you normally cling to. Before you begin, notice your resistance. After you finish, notice your calm. Did it weaken you, or did it give you back control? This is your third Stoic move. Practice small pain. Because resilience isn't born in calm waters. It's forged when you choose the waves. You'll feel stronger after this. But strength without boundaries can burn itself out. Which is why the next rule turns to the most overlooked thief of peace, the quiet erosion of saying yes when you should say no. Rule 4. Protect your yes. Boundaries break the cycle. You know the feeling, that tightness in your chest after saying yes, again, when you didn't really want to. At first, it feels like generosity. You tell yourself you're being helpful, professional, agreeable. But later, the quiet resentment creeps in. Epictetus warned that your true responsibility is only what lies within your control. Yet, so much of your anger is not about what others ask of you. It's about how easily you hand over your consent. Overcommitment is often a self-inflicted wound. Modern psychology confirms this. Each unnecessary yes drains the nervous system. Every extra obligation chips away at your attention, your rest, your creative energy. What seems like kindness in the moment often transforms into hidden resentment, and that resentment simmers into anger. What looks like selflessness becomes the very fire that later consumes you. Now imagine a different scene, one closer to your world. A freelancer, eager to prove themselves, says yes to every client request. Extra revisions? Yes. A late night turnaround? Yes. A project that pays less than it's worth? Yes, again. On the surface, this looks like hustle, but inside, exhaustion grows. The projects pile higher, deadlines close in, and resentment builds. Soon, the very creativity that once gave them freedom begins to suffocate under the weight of overcommitment. The spark that fueled their craft dims into burnout. Here lies the twist. Every unnecessary yes is silent karma. You think you're helping. You think you're buying goodwill or stability. But in reality, you're planting the seeds of the very cycle that drains you. The anger that erupts later, at a client, at a partner, even at yourself, isn't sudden. It was prepaid in 1,000 quiet agreements. The Stoics would call this a failure to guard the one domain you truly control, your choice. If you don't protect your yes, you're not being noble. You're giving away the keys to your peace. Seneca would remind you that time is the one resource you can never renew. Every yes that betrays your values is a theft from yourself. So here's your practice. Write one no script. Make it respectful, simple, clear. Something like, I appreciate the opportunity, but I can't take this on right now. Then use it once this week. It might be as small as declining a meeting that adds nothing, or as big as refusing a role, like Viola Davis, that undermines your dignity. Each time you guard your yes, you reclaim not just your calendar, but your clarity and your freedom. Boundaries are what stop the buildup. Protecting your yes is not selfish, it's sanity. And when someone still lights the match, even after your boundaries are clear, you'll need one more tool. Because silence is what douses the flame. Boundaries stop the buildup. And when someone still lights the match, silence douses it. Rule 5. Silence kills fire. How to starve the drama. Seneca put it simply. Anger dies without fuel. Drama thrives on reaction, on your willingness to pour oil onto the fire. And here's the truth. Most provocateurs aren't really fighting you. They're replaying their own unfinished battles, their unresolved stories, hoping you'll pick up the other side of the rope. The more you engage, the more you're pulled into their orbit. Psychology confirms this. Disengagement is one of the most effective ways to de-escalate conflict. By refusing to feed the story, you deny the drama the oxygen it needs to keep burning. Think of Roger Federer. Through decades of competitive tennis, he became a symbol of calm resilience. When heckled, when questioned, when doubted, he rarely answered with words. He answered with play. His silence was not weakness, but a quiet defiance, a refusal to let others' noise dictate his game. The arena roared. Commentators speculated. Opponents sometimes tried to rattle him. But Federer's genius lay in his capacity to starve the drama. He gave nothing unnecessary to the fire. He reserved every ounce of energy for precision, for movement, for craft. Now bring this down into your daily life. A colleague sends a baiting email, sharp and needling. The easy move is to volley back with equal heat, escalating the exchange. The stronger move is restraint. Reply once with facts, short and clean, or not at all. Like a match-striking stone, the spark fizzles out when there's nothing to ignite. The drama expects an audience, expects you to clap back, expects you to play your part in the performance. The moment you refuse, the curtain falls. But there's a deeper layer here, one that ties to old survival patterns. Sometimes drama feels magnetic because chaos once meant attention, even love. If you grew up in an environment where conflict equaled connection, part of you may still lean toward fire, mistaking it for warmth. Silence becomes more than strategy. It becomes healing. Every time you choose not to feed the blaze, you teach yourself that you no longer need chaos to exist. You remind your nervous system that safety doesn't come from noise, but from stillness. This is where Stoicism aligns with modern psychology. The Stoics urged you to master the impulse before it masters you. Today, therapists speak of breaking cycles, refusing to replay patterns that once kept you trapped. When you starve the drama, you're not just ending an argument. You're rewiring your relationship to conflict itself. You're sending a message inward. The past is not the script for your present. So here's your practice. When provoked, count to 10 in silence before replying. Let those 10 seconds be your shield. If it's possible, take the conversation offline, away from the public stage where drama loves to grow. This isn't passivity, it's mastery. You conserve your energy for what matters. You protect your attention from being siphoned into someone else's storm. And as the screen fades, the energy shifts forward. You've cut the fuel lines. You've spared yourself the drama. What remains is clarity, space, strength, and energy reclaimed. And that begs the next question. What will you do with the power you've protected? Silence resets the scene. Now use that freed energy to aim at purpose. Rule 6. Redirect anger into purpose. Marcus Aurelius left you a map for moments of frustration. The obstacle becomes the way. What blocks you can also build you if you redirect the energy instead of wasting it. Psychology calls this reappraisal, reframing the meaning of what happens so the raw surge of emotion becomes usable fuel. Anger, when misdirected, scorches, but when aimed, it can light the path forward. Look at Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx. She faced rejection after rejection. Patent attorneys laughed her out of offices, manufacturers dismissed her ideas, investors turned her away. She could have raged, quit, or proven them right by shrinking back. Instead, she took that sting and refined her invention, sharpening it until the world had to pay attention. Rejection didn't crush her, it channeled her. Bring it closer. Imagine missing a critical deadline. The first instinct is to rant, curse yourself, blame the system, lash out at others. But instead, you pause. You write down 2 simple lines, the problem and the next step. Then you send a plan, not your rage. What could have become a shouting match becomes a pivot toward progress. Here's the deeper truth. Anger isn't proof for ghosts. It is raw energy to build something real. Too often, people mistake the heat as evidence of weakness or unworthiness, chasing achievement to silence a past wound. But Stoicism offers you a clean break. You don't need to perform for old shadows. You can let the fire drive creation, not compensation. The wound is no longer a master. It's raw material waiting for your craft. This is how psychology and philosophy meet. Neuroscience shows that emotion, when labeled and redirected, engages the brain's problem-solving circuits instead of its threat circuits. Seneca would nod at this. You tame the blaze by giving it purpose. In practice, it means you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What can I make of it?" Your tool is simple. When anger strikes, write this sentence. Because of this, I will. Fill in the blank with one purposeful step, and then act once. Not a grand plan, not a dozen moves, just one. Each time you repeat it, you are reforging anger from enemy into ally, turning heat into direction. And what happens next is subtle but powerful. You've learned to aim the heat, but heat alone, without grounding, can still burn you out. The fire needs a container, something steady enough to hold it without cracking. That steadiness is what protects your choices from snapping under pressure. You redirected the heat, now steady the body so choices don't snap. Rule 7. Breathe back control, calm in a single breath. The Stoics knew that mastery begins not in grand gestures, but in the pause. Even Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by the weight of empire, reminded himself that clarity comes when you reclaim the space between impulse and action. And the simplest way to reclaim that space is through breath. Breath is your anchor, invisible, always with you, and yet often forgotten until the very moment you most need it. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics intuited. When you slow your breathing, you activate the vagus nerve, pulling your nervous system out of fight or flight and back into calm regulation. The heart rate steadies, the storm in the mind begins to settle, and your choices return to you. Breath is not just oxygen. It is a signal to the body that you are safe enough to respond, not merely react. Watch Simone Biles before a routine. The cameras zoom in, the crowd roars, the world waits, and yet she closes her eyes, takes one long, deliberate breath, and centers herself. That breath is her fortress, her reset button, her declaration that fear and pressure do not own her. Without that pause, nerves could hijack her. With it, she steps into mastery. You can practice the same in the chaos of everyday life. Picture this. You're stuck in traffic, another driver cuts you off, and rage surges through you. Your grip on the wheel tightens, shoulders tense, breath shortens. In that moment, the old reflex is to blast the horn, to chase, to prove a point. But instead, you catch yourself. You inhale for 4, hold, exhale for 4, hold again. 90 seconds of box breathing right there in the car. Slowly, the grip eases, the pulse drops, the mind clears. By the time the light turns green, you're no longer a hostage to the wave of fury. The road is still crowded, but you are free. Your action is simple, but not small. The next time anger rises, set a timer for 2 minutes and practice box breathing. Try it now with the guided overlay. Inhale as the circle expands, hold as it pauses, exhale as it shrinks, and hold again. Let the rhythm carry you. Notice the body softening, the mind resetting, the choice returning to your hands. This is the paradox the Stoics already knew. The strongest person is the one who commands the smallest space, a single breath between impulse and action. Breath reigns the body, and when the body is calm, the mind can learn, which brings you to the final and most radical step, to make the enemy your teacher. Breath reigns the body. The final rule, make the enemy your teacher. Rule 8, use the enemy. Turning hurt into a teacher. Epictetus told his students that adversity is not punishment, but training ground. Life, in his words, hands you weights to lift so that strength might be forged. What you call an enemy, whether it's a critic, a failure, or a wound from long ago, can become a sparring partner, shaping your resilience. The Stoic move is not to curse the weight, but to recognize how it chisels you. Modern psychology echoes this wisdom. Researchers call it post-traumatic growth, the process where pain, once processed instead of buried, becomes the very soil for wisdom, compassion, and grit. The cracks where you once broke can become the places where light gets in, guiding not just you, but also those who walk behind you. Think of Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft. His personal life carried profound hardship. His son was born with severe disabilities, and his family lived through years of care, loss, and resilience. Nadella did not numb or deny this pain. Instead, he allowed it to reshape his leadership. Under his guidance, Microsoft transformed from a culture of rivalry to one of empathy and collaboration. His enemy was not a rival in the marketplace, but an unwanted fate. And yet, he chose to let it deepen him rather than harden him. You face the same choice in smaller, everyday theaters. Imagine this. You've prepared for weeks, rehearsed every line, built your slides, and then the presentation flops. The audience looks unimpressed, questions cut deep, and when you walk off stage, the sting feels unbearable. your first instinct is to spiral, to justify, to blame, to hide. But here, the Stoic move is sharper. You pause, you ask, what's one truth here? Even if 90% of the feedback is dismissive noise, that one grain of truth becomes your teacher. Instead of enemy, the failure becomes a reluctant guide, pointing you toward refinement you could not have found alone. Here's your practice. When hurt arrives, write down a single line. This shows I can improve. First step. Fill it in honestly. Maybe it's, this shows I can improve. Clarity. First step, cut one slide and sharpen the core message. Or, this shows I can improve. Patience. First step, breathe before answering. Then, anchor it by sharing with a trusted friend or writing it into your journal. Each time you do, you reclaim authorship of the story. Hurt stops being wasted fuel for bitterness and becomes raw material for growth. With this, the cycle is complete. You've named the fire, starved its story, trained with discomfort, guarded your yes, silenced drama, redirected to purpose, breathed back control, and finally, used the enemy as teacher. Together, these steps form not just a way to resist anger, but a way to live unshaken, strong enough to stand in pain, wise enough to learn from it, free enough to turn even adversity into an ally. You've walked through the fire. Now step back and see the whole path it has cleared. Memento mori. Liberation from anger's cycle. Each rule now returns in flashes of everyday life, bedtime whispers naming the fire, cold water splashing over tense skin, a quiet refusal that guards dignity, a breath that steadies a racing pulse, a pen scribbling lessons from failure. They are small, almost invisible acts, yet each is a thread that rewrites karma's pattern. Not punishment, not fate. Liberation, chosen one moment at a time. An hourglass tilts on screen, then shatters. The message is plain. Your time is not infinite. The Stoics never wanted you to forget this. Memento mori. Remember you will die. Not to frighten you, but to sharpen you. Anger, drama, resentment, these are heavy chains to carry on a brief journey. Why spend what little sand remains repeating cycles you could break today? Marcus Aurelius left a reminder for you, written not as an emperor, but as a human being wrestling with the same storms you know. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. So the invitation is simple. Take one rule, just one, and practice it before the day ends. Notice how the cycle shifts. And if this path speaks to you, subscribe to Unshakeable Calm and share your reflections in the comments. Not for the algorithm, but because wisdom deepens when it is practiced together. Choose your freedom.